Ethan Hale had lived on the edge of Red Valley all his life. His ranch sat between two long ridges of red stone that looked beautiful from a distance but carried a heavy history. People in the nearby town always whispered that Ethan's land was cursed. They said strange things happened. Their animals disappeared, crops dried too fast, and storms hit only his property. Most of it was just talk, but Ethan grew tired of hearing it. Still, he stayed because the land was his father's and his grandfather's before him. He felt responsible for it, even when the whole valley thought something was wrong with it. Life on the ranch kept Ethan busy. Every morning he woke before sunrise, fed the horses, repaired fences, and checked the water line that ran toward the canyon behind his land. He did everything with quiet patience. He wasn't a man who complained. He just worked, hoping that one day things would get better. But the ranch always felt strangely heavy. Not dangerous, just lonely, like the land carried a secret it never told anyone. One late afternoon, as the sun lowered behind the cliffs, Ethan saddled his horse, Duke, for a routine ride toward the canyon. He needed to check a part of the fence that had been damaged during a recent storm. The air was warm, wind light, and everything seemed peaceful. Still, Ethan felt something different that day, though he couldn't explain what it was. He rode for half an hour. Duke stepped slow and steady until the canyon walls narrowed. The place always felt a bit unsettling, not because Ethan feared it, but because of the stories people said about it. Travelers said the canyon echoed oddly, making sounds that didn't belong to any human or animal. Others claimed they saw strange markings carved into the stone. Ethan never paid much attention to such tales. He considered them just stories people created when they had nothing better to do. But that afternoon, something new happened. Ethan heard a voice at first. It was faint, almost lost in the wind. He stopped his horse and listened carefully. The canyon was usually quiet, except for the sound of running water beneath the rocks. But this sound, this voice was different. It carried urgency, fear. A moment later, he heard it again. "Hello, is someone there?" A woman's voice, shaky but loud enough to reach him. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He urged Duke forward, following the direction of the sound. The path became narrower, and Duke had to stop. Ethan climbed down and continued on foot, his boots crunching on gravel. "Where are you?" He shouted. "Here," the voice replied, closer this time. "Please help." Ethan reached a bend in the canyon and froze. Standing near the edge of a deep drop was a woman in dusty travel clothes. Her dark hair was tangled, and her backpack was torn on one side. She looked exhausted and frightened. Before Ethan could speak, the ground beneath her shifted. Rocks loosened from above, crashing down the canyon wall. The woman stumbled backward, and dust filled the air. "Move," Ethan shouted, rushing toward her. She pointed toward a narrow opening in the rock wall, barely wide enough for two people. "Go deeper. Hurry," she cried. Ethan didn't question it. He grabbed her arm gently and pulled her toward the opening. More rocks tumbled behind them, hitting the ground where she had been standing only seconds earlier. They squeezed into the narrow passage, and the sound of falling debris echoed like thunder. Inside, the air was cooler, and the walls glowed faintly from light filtering through cracks above. They were safe, at least for the moment. The woman leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. Ethan waited a few seconds before speaking. "You all right?" She nodded slowly. "I think so. Thank you. I thought I was done for." Ethan gave a small nod. "Name's Ethan Hale. I live on the ranch past the canyon. What are you doing out here alone?" She straightened up and dusted off her clothes. "My name is Mara. I'm kind of on a search." "A personal one," Ethan raised an eyebrow. "A search? In this canyon?" Mara hesitated, then nodded. "My great-grandfather once wrote about this place. He explored these canyons a long time ago. He left journals about hidden trails and strange markings. I came to find them." Ethan looked around the narrow passage. The walls were covered in old carvings, symbols, lines, shapes he had seen before but never studied. Locals claimed the markings were part of the so-called curse. Ethan never believed that, but seeing them now, glowing slightly under the dim light, made him feel strangely aware of their importance. "You sure picked a dangerous day to come out here," Ethan said. Mara forced a small smile. "I guess I did. I didn't expect the rocks to start falling. I was just trying to follow a trail." Sudden rumble shook the ground. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Ethan checked the entrance, completely blocked now by fallen stones. "We're trapped," he said calmly. "But don't worry. People in town know this canyon shakes sometimes. If they hear the rock slide, they'll come looking." Mara nodded but looked worried. Ethan tried to lighten the mood. "Well, we're not the first folks to get stuck in a canyon, and we won't be the last." Mara chuckled softly. "You seem to calm for someone trapped underground?" "I've lived here all my life," Ethan replied. "This land has scared others, but not me. I know it better than anyone." Mara took a step forward, her eyes tracing the carvings along the walls. "These symbols. My great-grandfather said they were connected to something he called the sorrow of the valley. He believed they told a story." Ethan crossed his arms. "Town folks think these markings are why the land is cursed." Mara looked at him. "Do you believe that?" Ethan shook his head. "No. I think people make up stories when they don't understand something." Mara studied him for a moment. She seemed relieved by his answer. "Then maybe you're the right person to be here right now." Ethan didn't understand what she meant, but he let her continue. "My great-grandfather wrote that this canyon hides a chamber deeper inside, one that holds the truth about the valley's past. He believed the so-called curse wasn't a curse at all. He wrote that the truth was buried, and someday someone would uncover it." Ethan frowned. "Sounds more like an old legend. It's what I used to think," Mara said softly, "until I found his last map. It pointed exactly to this canyon." She held up a folded piece of worn paper from her backpack. Ethan leaned closer. The map was hand-drawn with careful strokes. Symbols matched the ones on the wall. A dotted line marked a path through the canyon, and the path ended exactly where they were standing. Ethan felt a chill, not of fear, but of recognition. Something inside him stirred. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. "So you think this passage leads to that chamber?" Ethan asked. Mara nodded. "Yes, and I think the chamber might hold answers about your land too." Ethan didn't want to admit it, but the thought made his heart beat a little faster. For years he carried the weight of the valley's rumors, the cold stares, the quiet whispers behind his back. If there was even a small chance these walls held the truth, he couldn't ignore it. "We can't go back anyway," he said, pointing at the blocked entrance. "Might as well go deeper." Mara looked grateful. "Thank you. I don't want to force you." "You didn't?" Ethan said simply. "Besides, you got my attention the moment you yelled, 'Go deeper, hurry.'" Mara smiled shyly. "I was just trying not to get crushed." "Fair enough," Ethan replied. They moved slowly through the narrow passage, their footsteps quiet. Small beams of light filtered from cracks above, guiding their way. The deeper they went, the more the markings changed. Some were clearer. Some looked rushed, as if carved by shaking hands. Others looked ancient, edges worn smooth by time. Mara ran her fingers gently along the stone. "These markings tell a story in pieces. They talk about water, fear, and families. All connected somehow," Ethan observed closely. "Families." "Yes," Mara said. "My great-grandfather believed 2 families controlled the early water lines of this valley. One helped keep the valley alive. The other, well, there are some hints of conflict." Ethan's heart tightened. "My family lived here since the early days." Mara stopped walking slowly. Her eyes softened. "Then maybe this story is yours too." They stood quietly in the cool, dim passage. The weight of her words settled gently around them. Ethan didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in years, he felt something new, a spark of hope, and deep in the canyon, surrounded by old carvings and forgotten history, that hope felt strangely right. Ethan and Mara continued deeper into the narrow passage, moving slowly because the ground wasn't smooth anymore. Small rocks rolled under their feet, and the walls closed in and then widened again like waves frozen in stone. The air felt cooler as they walked, and the faint light from above began to weaken. Ethan used a small flashlight he kept in his pocket. He often carried it when riding through the canyon, just in case he needed it during evening hours. Mara walked beside him, carefully studying the markings on the walls. She paused often, tracing her fingers gently along the carved lines. The symbols changed gradually the deeper they went. At the start of the tunnel, the carvings looked familiar. Ethan had seen them his whole life on rocks near the ranch. But these deeper markings were sharper, clearer, and more detailed. They showed shapes of people, water channels, crops, and what looked like two families marked by different symbols. "These are much older," Mara whispered. "My great-grandfather mentioned deeper carvings like these. He believed they explained everything." Ethan nodded but stayed mostly silent. He wasn't afraid, but he felt uneasy, not because of the darkness, but because he sensed he was about to walk into a part of his past he never knew existed. They reached a part of the passage where the ceiling dipped low. Ethan bent forward, using his shoulder to push away loose stones. Sometimes Mara had to crouch almost fully to pass through. But after many minutes, the passage straightened and opened into a slightly wider space. A small beam of sunlight found its way through a crack high above, lighting a circle on the floor. The floor there was smooth, unlike the rough rock around it. Mara knelt down and brushed dust away, revealing faint lines carved into the ground. "It's a map," she said, excited. "A map of the valley." Ethan knelt beside her. Now he could see it too. The familiar shape of the valley, the ridges, the center riverbed, the canyon itself, everything carved carefully. Two symbols appeared at opposite ends of the map. One was the same symbol Ethan always saw near his ranch, three short slanted lines. The other was a spiral shape. "My family's symbol is there," Ethan said quietly, pointing at the three lines. Mara nodded. "Three lines represent the Hale family. I saw that symbol in my great-grandfather's notes." Ethan stared at her in surprise. "He knew my family name?" "Yes," Mara said. "He didn't write full names, but he referenced the family of three lines. He wrote that they once controlled the water that kept the whole valley alive." Ethan swallowed. "Then why do people believe we brought a curse?" "That," Mara replied softly, "might be the story this place wants to tell." They continued walking. The ground sloped downward now, and the passage grew wider. Ethan shined the flashlight on the walls, and the carvings became clearer and more detailed. Scenes of people working together, building water channels, sharing tools, guiding animals, and planting fields. It looked peaceful, but then the carvings changed. The next scene showed arguments, figures pointing at each other, dividing lines carved across the valley map. There were symbols of broken tools, dried crops, and empty wells. Two sets of symbols stood on opposite sides of the carved pictures, the three slanted lines on one side, a spiral on the other. Mara touched the spiral symbol gently. This was the other family. "My great-grandfather believed they tried to control resources during a drought. When water began to dry up, fear took over. Makes people do foolish things," Ethan said quietly. "Yes," Mara agreed. "And sometimes, instead of fixing problems, people look for someone to blame." Ethan breathed slowly. This was the first connection he had seen that suggested the curse. The story wasn't real at all, but something human-made. They kept walking until the passage opened into another chamber. This one was larger, with a ceiling high enough that the flashlight beam didn't reach the top. Dust sparkled in the air, floating gently like tiny stars. Near the center stood wooden beams leaning against the walls. Some had carvings on them. Others were blank. Old lantern hooks were still fixed into the stone. Most lanterns were gone, but one rusty frame remained, hanging by a broken chain. "It looks like someone camped here long ago," Ethan said. "Maybe several people," Mara added. She stepped closer to a group of wooden boards piled in the corner. She lifted one carefully. Underneath it was a small metal box covered in dust. She gasped. "This looks like the box my great-grandfather described." Ethan knelt beside her as she slowly opened it. Inside were folded papers, a small leather-bound journal, and a few metal tools that looked like measuring instruments. The smell of old paper filled the room. Mara opened the journal first. The handwriting inside was neat, but faded. She read aloud softly, Day 15. The deeper chambers reveal the truth behind the sorrow of the valley. The Hale family built the main channel that saved the valley during the long drought. But the rival family began spreading lies to gain control. Their false stories grew stronger than truth. Ethan stared at the journal with disbelief. My family saved the valley. It looks that way, Mara said gently. She continued reading. I fear the lies may become the only story future generations remember. I must hide these findings until I can prove them safely. Mara closed the journal slowly. He never got to reveal the truth. Something must have stopped him. Ethan felt a wave of emotions, shock, sadness, and strange relief. His entire life he carried the weight of the cursed story, even if he never fully believed in it. But hearing this from someone who lived generations ago, someone who had nothing to gain, lying felt like a door opening inside him. People turned against us because of a lie. Ethan whispered. Yes, Mara said. And lies can survive a long time if no one challenges them. They looked through the rest of the metal box. There were old land surveys showing how water originally flowed through the valley. One survey had the Hale symbol marked next to a water source that allowed crops to grow during the drought. Another map showed how the rival family tried to redirect that water by spreading fear and false stories. Then Ethan found something else, a folded paper with names written on it. Some names were crossed out, others written again with notes. At the top was a simple sentence. They carried the truth, but the valley carried the lie. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Mara placed a gentle hand on his arm. Your family wasn't cursed, Ethan. They were protectors. They kept the valley alive. He nodded slowly, unable to find words for a moment. Then he said softly, My father used to say our land wasn't unlucky. He said people were just scared of what they didn't understand. I never knew he was talking about something real. Mara smiled. Then maybe he knew more than he said. Ethan looked around the chamber again. There were places where boards once covered openings. Some had fallen, while others still blocked parts of the wall. Ethan lifted one to peek behind it. His flashlight revealed more carvings, larger ones. It's almost like a final message. These carvings showed two families shaking hands, sharing water again, rebuilding crops. Then the scene changed abruptly. A group of people, spreading stories, carrying symbols of fear, turning others away. The final carving depicted the spiral symbol placed over the valley, while the three slanted lines were pushed to the edge. They erased the truth. Ethan said quietly, and replaced it with a lie. Yes, Mara replied. And if your family stayed quiet, the lie became stronger. Ethan sat down on a large rock, the weight of everything settling inside him. I've lived with this shadow my whole life. People avoid my land. They treat me differently. I thought it was just superstition, but it was a story someone created. A story someone created, Mara repeated, and a story you can finally break. They remained silent for a long moment. The quiet tunnel felt peaceful rather than eerie now. The carvings around them no longer seemed strange. They felt like pieces of a long-forgotten truth waiting for someone to care enough to uncover it. Mara closed the metal box gently. We should take this with us when we leave. The town needs to know. Ethan nodded. Yes, they need to see the real story. Another rumble traveled through the passage, softer than before. Dust trickled from the ceiling, reminding them they were still trapped underground. Ethan stood. We should keep moving. There must be a second exit. People wouldn't build all this without a way out, Mara agreed. My great-grandfather believed the chamber had two entrances, one through the main canyon wall and one deeper inside. Together they gathered the journal, maps, and tools and carried them carefully as they continued deeper. The markings guided their way, and though the tunnel grew darker, the truth around them felt brighter. Ethan no longer walked with uncertainty. He moved with purpose. For the first time in many years, the so-called curse didn't feel like a shadow. It felt like a story that had reached its end, and hope, quiet at first, began to rise inside him. Ethan and Mara walked deeper into the tunnel, guided only by Ethan's flashlight and the hopes they carried after discovering the truth. The air was cooler now, and the walls around them felt older, almost as if they held memories from a different time. Their steps echoed softly, mixing with the faint rumbling of the rocks behind them. The sound reminded them they had limited time. The canyon walls outside had crumbled, and more loose stones might fall again. Still, neither of them felt fear anymore. The truth they had uncovered in the chamber had pushed away everything else. Ethan walked with a new sense of purpose, and Mara stayed close, holding the leather-bound journal carefully like a fragile piece of history. "Do you think this path really leads outside?" Mara asked after a while. "It has to," Ethan replied. "People carved all those markings. They built beams and hooks. They had to come and go somehow. They wouldn't trap themselves." Mara nodded. "I just hope the exit hasn't collapsed too." Ethan flashed a small smile. "We'll find a way. We've gotten this far." The passage sloped downward again, and then curved sharply to the right. Ethan shined the light ahead. The ground became sandy, and a cold breeze touched their faces. "Fresh air," Mara whispered. "That's a good sign." They followed the breeze until they reached another chamber, smaller than the first, but brighter. Light entered through a wide crack near the ceiling, sending warm beams across the floor. Dust floated like golden threads. In this chamber, the walls were carved with pictures of two families working together again, building canals, carrying buckets, planting seeds. It looked hopeful, almost like a forgotten dream of unity. Mara studied the carvings. "This must have been made after the drought ended. It looks peaceful again." But Ethan's eyes were fixed on the final picture, drawn in the deepest part of the wall. It showed a group of people turning away from the hail symbol and listening instead to the spiral symbol. The holy figure in the carving appeared alone, holding tools, still working even while others ignored him. "That's my family," Ethan said quietly. "We kept trying to help even after everyone turned against us." Mara reached out, touching the carving gently. "It shows strength, not sadness." Ethan nodded, thinking of his father and grandfather, quiet men who never argued with the town, never complained, never fought back against the story of the curse. They simply lived with it. Now Ethan understood why they looked sad sometimes when talking about the ranch. They deserved better, Ethan whispered. They deserved the truth. "And now you can give it to them," Mara said. "To the whole valley." Ethan inhaled deeply. "Let's keep going." They left the chamber and walked through a narrow hallway that led downward into a longer tunnel. It was silent here except for the gentle hum of wind coming from somewhere ahead. The walls were plain, without carvings now, as if the story was complete and didn't need more pictures. A few minutes later, they reached a ledge where the tunnel opened into a tall cavern. Ethan shined his light across it. The cavern was huge, bigger than any part they had seen. The ceiling stretched high above, and a narrow stream of water trickled down one side, making soft rippling sounds. Mara stepped forward. This must be the natural spring mentioned in the survey map, the one that kept the valley alive years ago. Ethan knelt and touched the water. It was cold and clear. "My grandfather used to talk about a secret water source. He said our land had a gift that others couldn't see." "Maybe he knew this place existed," Mara said. Ethan nodded slowly. "Maybe he did." On the far side of the cavern was a tall, jagged crack in the rock wall, wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Sunlight filtered through it, stronger than before. It must have led outside. "We found it," Mara said, smiling with relief. Ethan exhaled deeply. Finally, they walked toward the crack, stepping carefully over uneven stones. When they reached it, Ethan climbed up first, pushing loose rocks aside. He felt the warm sun on his face. "It's clear," he said. "Come on." Mara handed him the metal box and journal before climbing up. Together, they squeezed through the exit, using rocks as foot grips, and stepped onto open ground. They were on the back side of the canyon, where hardly anyone ever traveled. The sky was clear, bright blue, and the wind brushed their faces softly. Mara laughed with relief. "We made it." Ethan looked around, taking in the wide landscape. He had lived in the valley all his life, but the view from here felt different, bigger, freer, full of promise. "We should head toward the ranch," Ethan said. "The valley search team might be looking for us." They walked across the open land. The sun was warm, the air clean, and their bodies felt lighter. Ethan stopped once in a while to look at the metal box in his hands. Every time he looked at it, he felt a mix of pride and sadness. Pride because the truth was powerful. Sadness because his family never got the chance to defend themselves. After nearly 40 minutes, he saw dust rising near the ridge. A group of riders approached. They were from the town's search team. Ethan waved, and the riders hurried over. "There you are," one of them shouted. "We thought you were gone." Another rider looked at the dirt on Ethan's clothes. "We heard the rock slide. What happened?" Ethan exchanged a look with Mara. She nodded, giving him silent courage. "We found something," Ethan said firmly. "Something important. Something that changes everything." The riders listened as Ethan explained a little, just enough to tell them they were safe and that they had discovered old documents. The full truth needed calm, not excitement. So Ethan decided to speak to the whole town later. When they reached the ranch, people were waiting: neighbors, search team members, even the town sheriff. Ethan's ranch had never seen this many visitors at once. Everyone wanted to know what happened. Ethan stood on the porch, Mara beside him. He held the journal gently in his hands. "I've lived here all my life," he began. "People always said my land was cursed. People blamed my family for storms, droughts, and anything bad that happened." He paused, feeling the weight of many years rise inside him. "But we found the truth. There was never a curse. There was a lie." The crowd grew quiet. Some exchanged confused looks. Others leaned forward, wanting to hear more. Ethan opened the journal. "This is written by a man who explored the canyon generations ago. He found proof that the Hale family, my family, helped build and protect the water systems that saved this valley during the drought." Mara held up the old maps. "These surveys show that the Hale family managed the water flow fairly. They worked hard to keep crops alive, even when conditions were terrible." Another writer asked, "Then why did people say the land was cursed?" Mara replied calmly, "Because a rival family spread stories out of fear during the drought. They blamed the Hale family to gain control. The lie became stronger than the truth." A long, stunned silence followed. People looked at one another, shocked, guilty, or thoughtful. The sheriff stepped forward. "I've lived here 50 years. And I never heard this version, because no one ever found the evidence," Ethan said. A woman from the crowd spoke quietly. "We judged your family. We said things we shouldn't have." Keitha nodded slowly. "I know, but the truth is here now, and I hope we can start fresh," the crowd murmured, many nodding. Some came forward to apologize. Others offered help repairing fences, checking the ranch's water lines, or simply visiting to talk. For the first time in many years, Ethan felt the weight lift from his shoulders. The valley had finally stopped blaming him. As the sun lowered, painting the sky orange, the crowd left one by one, leaving Ethan and Mara on the porch. The horses stood quietly near the fence, and the wind carried the peaceful smell of evening grass. Mara looked at Ethan with a warm smile. "You did it. You broke the curse." Ethan shook his head gently. "We did it." Then he looked toward the canyon. "I never thought one day would change my whole life." Mara sat beside him. "Sometimes the truth just needs someone brave enough to uncover it." Ethan glanced at her, feeling grateful. "I'm glad you came here, Mara. Without you, I might never have known." Mara smiled softly. "I'm glad too." They sat quietly for a while, watching the land stretch peacefully before them. The ranch didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt alive, full of new possibilities. The wind seemed calmer, the fields brighter, the sky wider. Ethan knew the land wasn't cursed. It never had been. It was waiting for the truth. It's waiting for understanding, waiting for hope, and now that hope had finally come home.